My name's Sam Mead, and the title of what I'm gonna this piece is called "The Aleph in the Room." So I'm struggling a bit with the light. I'd like to begin by elucidating the term Aleph, as I'm using it in the context of this talk. As some of you may already be aware, Aleph is the name given to the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It also has usage as a mathematical term to denote the size of infinite sets of numbers. The Aleph is also the name of a short story written by the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. In that short story, Borges writes, "As is well known, the Aleph is the name of the first letter of the alphabet of the sacred language. For the Kabbalah, this letter signifies the Ein Sof, the limitless and pure divinity. It has also been said that it has the form of a man who points out heaven and earth, to indicate that the inferior world is the mirror and map of the superior. It is the symbol of transfinite numbers, in which the whole is no greater than any of its parts." In the context of his short story, the Aleph is a point housed in the dining room cellar of the protagonist's friend, which contains all points. In other words, a portal through or in which one can see everything at once. I'm now going to read an excerpt from the short story, which describes the point at which the protagonist, after being led down into the basement by his friend, who by this point he has become convinced is mad, looks into the corner of the cellar and sees the Aleph. I apologise for the mispronunciation of... There's a few place names in here that I don't know how to say very well. "In that single gigantic instant, I saw millions of acts, both delightful and awful. Not one of them occupied the same point in space, without overlapping or transparency. What my eyes beheld was simultaneous, but what I shall now write down will be successive, because language is successive. Nonetheless, I'll try to recollect what I can. On the back part of the step, toward the right, I saw a small iridescent sphere of almost unbearable brilliance. At first I thought it was revolving. Then I realized that this movement was an illusion created by the dizzying world it bounded. The Aleph's diameter was probably little more than an inch, but all space was there, actual and undiminished. Each thing, a mirror's face, let us say, was infinite things, since I distinctly saw it from every angle of the universe. I saw the teeming sea, I saw daybreak and nightfall, I saw the multitudes of America, I saw a silvery cobweb in the centre of a black pyramid. I saw a splintered labyrinth. It was London. I saw close-up, unending eyes watching themselves in me as in a mirror. I saw all the mirrors on earth, and none of them reflected me. I saw in a backyard of Solar Street the same tiles that 30 years before I'd seen in the entrance of a house in Fray Bentos. I saw bunches of grapes, snow, tobacco, loads of metal, steam. I saw convex equatorial deserts, and each one of their grains of sand. I saw a woman in Inverness whom I shall never forget. I saw her tangled hair, her tall figure. I saw the cancer in her breast. I saw a ring of baked mud on the sidewalk where before there had been a tree. I saw a summer house in Adrogue and a copy of the first English translation of Pliny, Philemon Holland's, and all at the same time saw each letter on each page. I saw a sunset in Quelataro that seemed to reflect the colour of a rose in Bengal. I saw my empty bedroom. I saw a closet in Alkmaar, a terrestrial globe between two mirrors that multiplied it endlessly. I saw horses with flowing manes on a shore of the Caspian Sea at dawn. I saw the delicate bone structure of a hand. I saw the survivors of a battle sending out picture postcards. I saw in a showcase in Mirzapur a pack of Spanish playing cards. I saw the slanting shadows of ferns on a greenhouse floor. I saw tigers, pistons, bison, tides and armies. I saw all the ants on the planet. I saw a Persian astrolabe. I saw in the drawer of a writing table unbelievable, obscene, detailed letters which Beatrice had written to Carlos Argentino. I saw a monument I worshipped in the Chacarita cemetery. I saw the rotted dust and bones that had once deliciously been Beatrice Viterbo. I saw the circulation of my own dark blood. I saw the coupling of love and the modification of death. I saw the Aleph from every point and angle, and in the Aleph I saw the earth, and in the earth the Aleph, and in the Aleph the earth. I saw my own face and my own bowels. I saw your face, and I felt dizzy and wept. For my eyes had seen that secret and conjectured object whose name is common to all men, but which no man has looked upon, the unimaginable universe. So that's the quote. When I read this story for the first time, it resonated with me, as I'm sure it did with many other people, not just for the fact that it's a wonderfully imaginative and beautifully written short story, but because it put me in mind of a short piece that I'd written earlier, which I think of now as being the product of my own search for an Aleph. The crucial point of this piece, which I'll read in a moment, and indeed this talk, is the notion of, within a structure, especially one specifically designed to be lived in, be it a physical structure such as this or a structure of the mind, the notion of an uninhabitable space. As children, almost all of us seek out these regions of our homes, these uninhabitable spaces. We crawl under the bed, we build forts behind the sofa, we fantasize about the murky contents of the attic or the cellar, we hide in cupboards. I personally, as a child, had a penchant for lying backward on the sofa with my head hanging back over the edge of the seat so that I was looking at the ceiling. After a time in this position, my mind began to be convinced that the ceiling was the floor and that all of the objects in the room that were actually on the floor, including myself, were hanging from the ceiling. I would then imagine being able to drop down onto the ceiling and walk around in the white empty space. My point is, as children, we seek out these mysterious spaces in a literal sense, and we oppose upon them the vigour and breadth of our imaginations. As we get older, and most of us lose interest in these particular incarnations of our desire to seek out uncharted space, that does not mean we should not, or for many people do not, continue to search within our worlds for the uninhabitable spaces which, although we may not want or be able to physically conquer, we can look upon as representations of the corners of our mind in which imagination and creativity can thrive, unfettered by the preconceptions, insecurities, dogmas and learned knowledge which, as we age and develop, come to influence and constrain the patterns of our everyday thoughts. In other words, we may look to these uninhabitable zones as metaphors for escape routes from what I would call the domesticated mind. The fact of these spaces being uninhabitable is key, although as children the arrogance of our youth often leads us to mistakenly believe that knowledge is in some way a destination at which we may arrive and subsequently live. To give an example, note the conviction and satisfaction with which a child will recount something that they have learned at school. There can be no doubt whatsoever that they know what they have been taught. And this same indefatigable self-centeredness and self-belief is what leads us at a young age to assume without question that we may happily live behind the sofa for the rest of our lives. However, as we get older and many of us come to the realization that we cannot reasonably make a permanent home for ourselves behind the sofa or under the bed, or that the concepts of knowledge and creativity are not, in fact, strictly definable endpoints in our thinking, but rather infinite processes that we can never wisely consider to be complete, we discover that the inhabitability of certain physical places or sets of ideas is absolute, and furthermore necessary as a motivating factor in the continuation of our learning. As such, as we grow up and emerge into an adult world that is so largely conquered, both physically and ideologically, the search for uninhabitable spaces, blank canvases, becomes ever more pressing and poignant. And so now to my piece that I mentioned earlier, which I believe describes the beginnings of my own conscious search for an uninhabitable space within the domestic landscape, my own Aleph. Before I go on, I'd like you all to imagine yourself not in this room as it is, but as it might once have been, fully domesticated, carpeted, freshly wallpapered, pictures hanging on the wall, sofas, tables, lamps, rugs. Try to imagine it as an average living room, an area in which almost all of the space has been considered, measured, quantified and colonized. There is a reason why I'd like you to do that. And I'll explain that in a minute. Look to the points at which ceilings and walls meet one another to form high corners. High corners may be one of the only points of genuine interest to be found within the average occupied room. The wide planes of wall, floor and ceiling may all be colonized by carpets, chairs, lights, paintings and the like, and the low corners can be plugged by any object with a right-angled frame. But in those high corners are a few square inches of uninhabitable space. Sometimes when I am alone in a room, I would step onto a chair and reach up to a high corner, touching it with my fingertips. I push my index finger into the point at which all surfaces meet and invent the inner peak of a small pyramid. I stare hard into that small space and consider it. It is intriguing to explore these unknowable regions, these esoteric apexes that lie in plain view within the domestic landscape. For in a space that contains such an abundance of nothingness, surely therein must lay the potential for everything. Now this piece does not present a conclusion, but my hope is to initiate a beginning. It stands alone only as something unresolved and unsatisfying. Its purpose, whether or not it is achieved, is to compel the reader to search for uncultivated space in the physical world and in the mind as a means of expressing him or herself unrestrainedly and in a way that is unique. You remember that before I read the short piece, I asked you to imagine the room in a more traditionally civilized state. The reason for this was simply an attempt to place you in a scenario more typical within a structure more domesticated than this. As in day-to-day life, it is not often that many of us will find ourselves in a space quite like this. My thinking is that if you are able to find a space of interest within the average room when you are confronted with a structure such as this one, it should provoke such a cavalcade of inspiration that you hardly know where to begin. In my imagining, as a place degrades, is stripped down, the accoutrements of culture largely removed or decayed, and it is left uninhabited, it is not only its blank corners which become imbued with mystery, but the entirety of its being. In short, the structure itself becomes a giant Aleph, a multifaceted blank canvas upon which we may easily project the contents of our thoughts and imaginations. This leads me to the final part of what I have to say today, which is something I've written which was inspired by this building. And here the tone changes somewhat because this is a piece of creative writing. The building, I think, is simply an illusory creation of my broken sleep. I'm in the bed of a friend who rose and departed early for work, leaving me to curl up in the new space like a pupil shrinking in the morning's bitter light. In the dream, the building, it is a house, firstly stands in the midst of a dense fog, permeating the moist haze with the extremities of its frame, but largely hidden from view. Gradually the fog recedes, burned away by sun rays which cut an angular course, hitting the windows at such a slant as to stupefy the panes with a dazzling splash, and I am unable to see inside. It stands, barely, the walls listing, crumbling, leaning on one another like a chorus of drunks. Then it disappears. I lie in the strip of dusk that exists between the thick darkness of sleep and the searing brightness of its opposite. I am asleep, I am awake. The building is bonded at the seams by that vivid broth, the same that keeps us manoeuvring between solids and swelling with the palpitations of its journey. Blood. In any instance, talk of art is hamstrung by its absence. Life has us bent like scorpions, scurrying between rocks, mouths smeared with sand, cowering beneath our virulent sun. I can hear music coming from somewhere below. The building is an open wound in which I sit, poisonous and lead-legged, draped in dirty flesh, waiting, facing down mirrors, turning glasses in the light, revolving on the spindle of hours as figures pass my window and disappear into the mind's plain sight. Smoke tapers to its new beginning, and the songs of that blistering screen slip sideways beneath the door. Someone is moving around downstairs. I hear the rush of an open tap, the plastic click of the kettle lid pressed shut. The building is red with blue doors. The window frames are made of gold. There is something ridiculous about the doorknobs, but from here I can't tell what it is. People are falling from the windows like petals dropping from a flower. As they descend, they make no attempt to break their fall, but to my surprise, they land unharmed. They stand up and walk away. I sit on a high stool in the dead centre of the upstairs landing, knotting my fingers in accordance with a sheet of laminated instructions. What time is it? I should be up. Inside the building, I stride between the rooms, tracing the domestic thoroughfares impressed into the carpets by 50 years of tread. The routes are distinct, trails of flattened pile which faintly gleam as a result of their smoothness, from the large sofa to the living room door, straight along the hallway in an oval around the dining room table, like riverbeds or towpaths at a cliff edge. The sea below is wrestling itself into a greater madness, a dancing froth of smashed bone. The horizon approaches like a fist. I'm looking for a clock. I open my eyes and look to the window, attempting to gain from the angle of the light some clue as to the true time. It must be noon. It could be 2. I hope it's 9. I close my eyes. I walk in and find you floundering on the ceiling with a face like Saturday night. Get down from there, I say. You blow your smoke at the bulb and tell me to watch the way it swirls in the light. We've all seen that before, I say. It's one of those things that's beautiful but so well documented that it should probably be kept to oneself. I go into the kitchen and make a drink. In the kitchen there is war beneath the sink, a balloon in the plate cupboard. The sugar survives on itself. The kettle breathes like a heavy man as I watch the tabletop moving in rhythm with the roll of the flame about the match's head. The door will not close. The windows are blind. The tin food shrugs at the fruit bowl's plumage as it lies magnificently like a discarded headdress. I think of Indians using every part of the buffalo and then of how the white man came with guns. A few minutes later you join me. We sit together in silence. I try to read your watch, but the way you lay your hands obscures its face. I have lived here 1 year. It has been at once fruitful and barren, 12 months spent rolling in dirt and spitting at a wall, bathing in soot, looking onto the street with hollow eyes, treacle heart, blue limbs, manly hands that were attached to my arms. I think in my sleep. I did not see them grow. The radio plays, the buses move in truculent passage, the sky moves like the ceiling of a stream. Where am I now? Drinking from stained mugs as the night sinks to its depth, dragging the minutes like bodies to a pile. I write a story. The fist of matted hair was nailed to the wall in the boy's mother's secret room. When he found it, she fled from the house like a lion. Alone in the house and feeling sure that she would never return, he shed a new kind of tear, one that fell more quickly and rolled across the cheek like a wooden wheel. Later on, he ate all the cheese in the pantry and fell asleep in a chair. I lay down the pen, unsatisfied. I'm looking for something that may not exist, the poetry of the untranslatable phrase. But then comes more, another story. On the floor of the house lay seeds and petals. The owner had died upstairs and rotted away to ash between the stiff sheets. Nothing in the house had been disturbed. It was all as the dead man had left it, and in that sense he remained alive, which accentuated his brilliant death. At the gate, the outside waited patiently, the arched brow of nature whispering to itself like a madman. On the shelves, dust. On the work surfaces, dust and implements of faith. From the window, I see a rainbow flame in the borehole dusk, a face in the ribs of this shriveled month. The mouth is wrong, the mind is slumped like butter. There are slivers in your veins, French blood, yellow jaws, a rectangle on your head and the moonlight boiling on your tongue. I wake again, but now there is no compulsion to rise. I should not get up, I should sleep. Stay in the house behind the squares of the windows, the backs of the chairs, the frank emptiness of the kitchen. The sunlight upstairs, poured gold, hot yellow dozing on the walls. The people downstairs, the people who have died. The anticipation of grief, the knowledge that I have no other wings but these. I am the shadow on my ceiling, lit from beneath, rising like a church, swallowing the smoke between the suns and blowing seeds at the obscenity of adulthood. At last, I wake, fully. The dream is over. I climb from the bed, dress myself and leave. Walking home, I pass the house but do not notice. I am looking the other way. Thank you.